Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I'm gonna go over the unit circle with you guys all, and I'm gonna be covering all of the details in the unit circle and plus my personal experienced tips. And I remember when I'm first learning unit circles, my teacher asked us to be able to label all of the coordinate points and be able to drawing the unit circles really quick, like within 1 minute. So I'm like really confused and really struggle at that moment. So in order to prevent you guys to fall into the same challenge as I did, I'm gonna show you like some really useful tips and strategies when you're come to remembering the unit circles. Okay, so let's dive deep into this topic. Okay, so I already draw the circles. Sorry if it's kind of like ugly or not. I already did my best drawings, so apologies for that. And I already labeled the 4 points, like 0 or 2 pi in here, and the pi over 2, and the pi, and the 3 pi over 2. And if you also want to doing the degrees, you can also say like this is the 0 degrees, this is 90 degrees, this is 180 degrees, and this is 270 degrees. And also for this is also like 360 degrees. So these two are all, because they're rotated exactly one circle around. So yeah. And then let's talk about like the real things. So I'm gonna start by drawing some, like I'm like really cutting the pizzas. It's kind of like a bad metaphor, I don't know. Okay. Okay. Okay, let's just really only talking about the first and third quadrant in here. So the first quadrant is really the things that you have to memorize. So it's actually like some relationships between the first quadrant and the rest of the quadrant. Like as long as you're remembering the first quadrant, it will be like easy. Like you really don't have to memorize all of the others. You're just gonna use the logic to get through all of the problems. So I'm just gonna label these coordinates points really quick. Okay. And then, okay, so these are the 3 angles in the first quadrant. So if you want to figuring out like the third quadrant angles, then thinking about that. So from this angle, rotate all the way back into here. Like there's actually like 180 degrees difference in here. Do you see that? It's really magical, like after you're getting it. And also the same thing as this angle, rotate it all the way out here, 180. This angle plus 180 in here. So after you knowing that, you can like easily getting the degrees mode. Firstly, I always feel easier than to getting the degrees symbols than the radian symbols. I don't know. But okay, so when we're talking about the radians, like how do you get from pi over 3 to like in here? So what will be the radian symbols for this? So remember it's plus 180, and 180 it's pi, right? So in order to get that, you're gonna actually adding pi to it. So pi over 3 plus pi, what will that be? That will be 4 pi over 3, right? And the same thing, pi over 4 plus pi will be 5 pi over 4. And pi over 6 plus pi will be 7 pi over 6. That's easy, right? Yeah, that's really save you a lot of time. And when we were talking about the coordinates, so remember the coordinate point is the same thing as like the corresponding angles in the first quadrant, like with the third quadrant, except the symbols. So remember in the first quadrant, like it's always like plus plus, and the second is minus, is negative plus, and the third is minus minus, fourth is plus minus. So in order to remember that, you're just gonna changing the signs in here, like not the numbers. So in here it will be negative root 3 over 2, negative 1/2, and this is negative root 2 over 2, negative root 2 over 2, and in here will be negative 1/2 and negative root 3 over 2. Okay, cool. So we get all of these numbers in the third quadrant, right? That's not that hard as you thought, right? So then let's do the same thing as second and fourth quadrant. Okay, so the second quadrant, well, always looking at the first quadrant, okay? So always first quadrant, really important. So what's the relationship between the second quadrant and the first quadrant? Well, think about that. From this angle, turn into this angle. Oh, I'm sorry. It's from this angle, turn into this angle. Like, thinking about this as the reference angles. So the reference angles is what in here, but right now we want to figure out here. So this is actually 180 minus this angles, right? Because this angle is the same thing as this angle. But in order to figure out this angle, we have to use 180 minus this angle. So we can get this. So 180 minus 30, it's giving us 150 degrees. And then remember 180 is the same thing as pi, so pi minus pi over 6 will be 5 pi over 6. And then the same thing as 45 degrees. So 180 minus 45 degrees will be 135 degrees. And the pi minus pi over 4 will be 3 pi over 4. And the same thing as in here, like the pi over 3, pi minus pi over 3 will be 2 pi over 3. And 180 minus 60 will be 120 degrees. Okay, so we get these. And also remember, as I said before, the corresponding angles with the first quadrant in any of the quadrant, they have exactly the same numbers of x and y coordinates, but the only exception is the signs. So because we're talking about in the second quadrant, then the x coordinate will be negative, then the y coordinate will be positive. So we can just label them exactly what we did before in the third quadrant. Okay, so then we get the second quadrant angles. Let's look at the fourth quadrant angles. So the same thing, fourth quadrant angles. So fourth quadrant angles, so think about that. 30 degrees, we have to rotate it all the way from here to here, right? So that's how much? That's actually 360 minus 30 degrees. Why? Because these angles are the same. These degrees are the same. We have to get, we want to figure out how much is this, like a all the way long rotation is the measure of this rotation. So it will be 360 minus 30 degrees. And the same thing apply to 45 degrees and 60 degrees. 360 minus them, you will get the corresponding angles in the fourth quadrant. So let's just label them. So first of all, the degree symbols, I think always the easiest one and always the first one I try to. 360 minus 30 degrees will be 330 degrees. And then same thing, 360 minus 45 degrees, 315 degrees. And then 360 minus 60 degrees will be 300 degrees. Okay, and also what is the corresponding radian symbols? So radians, remember the 2 pi is the same thing as 360 degrees. So in order to get these corresponding angles with the first quadrant angles, we're gonna using the 2 pi minus each of those radians. So 2 pi minus pi over 6 will give you 11 pi over 6. 2 pi minus pi over 4 will give you 7 pi over 4. And 2 pi minus pi over 3 will give you 5 pi over 3. Okay, and so the same thing applied to the coordinate points. Remember, x coordinate will always be positive, y coordinate will always be negative in fourth quadrant. So then we can get this. Okay, so then look, we complete like the whole unit circles. That's really a surprise, right? Like that's not as hard as you thought, right? After we go through all of the process in here. So just remember some tips. The first quadrant angles, these are the real things that you have to remember. And all of the other quadrant, just use the relationship with them. So for example, the second quadrant, the relationship with the first quadrant is 180 or pi minus the reference angles. The reference angles in here, I'm saying that, so the definition of reference angles is the angles like between the x-axis and their like the corresponding side. I really don't know like the exact definition for this. You probably have to search online or watch some YouTube videos for that. But just know that the reference angle I'm saying in here apply to all the angles in the first quadrant. So 30 degrees, 40 degrees, and the 60 degrees. Okay, so this is the relationship between second quadrant and third quadrant. Always use 180 minus the reference angle, or pi minus reference angle. And the third degree, third quadrant is you're gonna use the 180 plus the reference angle, or pi plus the reference angle. And the fourth quadrant, you're gonna use 360 minus reference angle, or 2 pi minus reference angle to get the corresponding angles with the first quadrant. So yeah, so be able to master all of these relationships and the topics, you'll be really easily to find like the corresponding angles in different quadrant, and also the coordinate points. Like always remember, like I know like there's like a tip for you guys, like if you learn that in class or like anything before, it's like ASTC, so all students take calculus. So remember that in the first quadrant, all of the sines, cosines, and the tangent are positive. And the second quadrant is that only the sines are positive. And the third quadrant is the tangent are positive. And the fourth quadrant is the cosines are positive. And also, really important things before I turn off this video is that when we are writing the coordinates point for this, always remember the x-coordinate correspond with the cosines, and the y-coordinate correspond to the sines. And the tangent is the sine over cosine, so it's the y-coordinate over x-coordinate. So be able to doing that, it's also a really useful tip. So for example, for this, the tan of this will be 1 over root 3. And the tan of this will be 1. And the tan of this will be root 3. So knowing these numbers, it's really useful for you when you're like when you're applying the other like the quadrant tangent things. You're only gonna change in the signs. The numbers will never change. Okay, so remember that. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned something from it. I'll see you next time. I hope you have a great day. Bye.